Okay, so welcome everybody. Thank you for joining to Exploring Terroir in Cheese and Wine with myself, Lydia Harrison and Patrick McGuigan. And you can see, hopefully you can see and hear both of us and see the slides. You can pin us if not, and everyone else is on mute because we are recording this, but please say hello in the chat. You can ask us any questions. One of us will try and monitor it while the other one is talking. So Patrick, do you want to introduce yourself first of all?
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Patrick McGuigan. I am a cheese writer. I'm a food journalist based in Brighton on the south coast of England. And yeah, I've been writing about food in general for about 20 years and have specialised in cheese for the past sort of 12 to 15 years. And it's given me a great opportunity to go and visit cheesemakers, cheese maturers, cheesemongers all over the world, make cheese with them and learn about what they do. So I write for newspapers and magazines. I do a lot of judging at the World Cheese Awards. There is such a thing where we sort of professionally assess cheeses. And I run training courses for the Academy of Cheese. So I'm sort of here on behalf of the Academy of Cheese, which was set up a couple of years ago, I think 3 years ago now. I mean, the WSET was quite inspirational for the Academy of Cheese. So what we try to do with the Academy of Cheese is similar in some ways to what happens at the WSET. So it's about increasing knowledge and expertise and appreciation of cheese. And we have, eventually there will be 4 levels. The 4th level will be Master of Cheese. So far we've launched 2 levels, level 1 and 2. Level 1 is a sort of 1-day course, and level 2 is a more involved 2-day course. And there you have an exam at the end, and it's an industry recognised certification, which has started in the UK, but actually is now branching out. And we have online courses that you can do if you're in Spain or Israel or China, wherever you are in the world. You can tune in and take the course online. I'm actually running some online courses. Maybe I'll put the address up later, but I'm starting one next month, and it's the level 1 course, and I'll do it over sort of 3 webinars. If you're in the UK, I can send you the cheese. If you're outside the UK, I can send you a list, and people can buy their own. So that's me.
Thank you, Patrick. And hello, everybody. I'm Lydia Harrison. I'm a Master of Wine as of last year, and I work at the WSET School in London. So it's the Wine and Spirit Education Trust's flagship qualification provider. And yes, myself and Patrick have hosted lots of fun cheese and wine events in person before, and since the lockdown, we've been doing some online. So we do qualifications in wine, spirits, and sake. And I'm actually developing some in beer, you'll be pleased to know, Patrick.
Oh, excellent. Just maybe we can talk about beer at times, or do we always have to talk about wine?
Yes, but only after I've done the new qualification. So I'm no beer expert. But yes, so we do qualifications from level 1 beginner to level 4 diploma in wines, which is the sort of really high-end qualification. And I also organise the events at the school. So at the moment, we're doing them as webinars. You can have a look on the website under tasting events to see what's coming up, and you can also look under student information webinar recordings to watch back on other cheese events that I've done with Patrick, or other wine events if you want to watch any of those back as well. So excellent. I think we should get cracking talking about terroir, because we always have so much to say, but that's just a little bit of an intro about us. And
Lydia,
yeah.
just Alice, has joined the group chat, Alice McCourt, she works for the Academy of Cheese. So she's on there sort of, if anyone's got any specific questions, Alice can answer them on the chat about the Academy.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alice, for fielding those. So yeah, I seem to be first up on this one, which is, it is quite hard to define terroir. People have different interpretations of it, and we thought we would look at what I would interpret it meaning for wine, and then Patrick what he would see terroir meaning for cheese. But there's lots of crossovers which hopefully we'll explore as we go through the session. And I see terroir as a really broad, encompassing term. So, in, you know, all of these things listed, some people will focus more perhaps on climate or perhaps the first three elements, but I see it as the sort of whole sense of place of where the wine comes from. And that for me incorporates everything. So the climate, whether that's the broad climate of the country, but microclimates of specific vineyards and plots. Soil, really important, and I'm going to touch on that particularly with one of the wines. So what I'm going to do as we go through is I've chosen one of the wines to talk about climate, one of them to talk about soil, one to talk, I've forgotten what I'm going to talk about with that one. Oh, viticultural practices, a couple, yeah, to do with the sort of viticultural practice in the winemaking. So to bring out some elements as we go through. Aspect as well, so what way is your vineyard facing, how steep is it, the slope, all of these things that can have an impact on growing your grapes and ultimately the end taste of the wine. What you plant, the grape varieties, you know, how they're planted, so are they close to the ground, are they trained really high, all of these things can affect ripening. Are you farming organically or sustainably? All sorts of different viticultural practices, from just choosing the point of harvest. All of these things can impact the wine and give, you know, the style and taste. And winemaking. So for me, terroir extends into the human touch as well, because often when we have a wine that we can really identify as tasting from a specific place, that's not just everything that happens naturally, but it's also the human influence in the vineyard, but also in the winery and how they then sort of amplify the terroir in the wine as well. So we'll talk about all these different things as we go through. It is pretty complex, but yeah, that's for me the key elements, and that's a lovely picture of New Zealand there, just to showcase. But obviously you see so many different pictures of vineyards and different styles of and ways of growing grapes. And I feel like Patrick's explanation of terroir might be a little bit more long-winded, so I'll hand you over.
Well, it's interesting. Originally, when we did these slides, Lydia put the cheese terroir slide first and then sent them to me, and then I changed them round and put the wine terroir slide first, because for me, terroir is a word that I think most people would immediately associate it with wine rather than cheese. And I think in a way the idea of terroir comes from wine, and is sort of fed into cheese, and people now talk about terroir in cheese. But yeah, I don't know, it sort of feels like I'm sort of interested. I think it's grown from wine, and I was thinking about, well, what does terroir in cheese mean? And so I've come up with a list of things which do overlap with what Lydia's talked about. So climate and soil are important in cheese. You know, if you will, some of this will be better explained as we go along and eat the cheeses, but so the actual, you know, the what's in the soil, you know, the type of geology, I suppose, can make an impact on the grass that grows, or the plants that grow, that the cows then eat, or the goats then eat, and that does translate through into specific flavors in cheese. But obviously livestock are also often fed as well. So as well as forage, which is what they find in the fields and in the pastures, they're also given feed. And so cows can be fed anything from turnips through to fermented grass, which is known as silage. So often in the summer, you cut your grass if you're a farmer, and in the UK, you ferment it, you pickle the grass. And so if you've ever been on a train or out in the countryside and you see those big pits covered in black tarpaulin with car tires on top of them, that's a silage pit, and they're fermenting grass, which keeps it, and then they feed it to the cows during the winter, and all of that has an impact on flavor. Animal species, you know, there's a lot of difference between buffalo milk and goat's milk and sheep's milk, and breed. So even, you know, there are lots of different cow breeds that will give you slightly different types of milk. Animal welfare, if the cows are being kept in a lot, or are free roaming, will have an impact. Seasonality, so you have a lactation cycle with animals. So, you know, at the beginning, they tend to have quite rich milk, and then So lots of fat and protein in the milk, and then it becomes thinner, and then towards the end of their lactation cycle, it will get thicker again. So all of those have an impact on the cheese. What you do to the milk when you get it in the dairy obviously has an impact. And then that last one, which I think is the big difference really with wine, although Lydia, you may well contradict me, which I'm sure you will, but bacteria in particular are absolutely essential to making cheese. You can't make cheese without bacteria. It's part of the, cheese is a fermented food, and what does the fermenting are things called lactic acid bacteria. And you can add those, and cheesemakers do, they add them, sort of lab-grown bacteria to their milk. But particularly with raw milk cheeses, which we're tasting today, there are all sorts of unique bacteria that you find on the grass, on the animal, like the udder of a cow has quite unique bacteria that in raw milk will have an impact. Actually in the dairy and from the cheesemaker, and also finally, if you see the picture there in the maturing room, you have bacteria and also yeasts and molds, so fungus, that all have big impacts on flavors. So you're right, Lydia, I was quite long-winded in my explanation.
No, you always go into more detail, and I always think I should have mentioned that, but it's very the same, that's why I wanted to incorporate winemaking, because ultimately, people can say, oh, oak's not very terroir, it can mask the flavors of the wine, but actually the same concepts go into oak. Is it from a specific forest, and they can pick different boughs to have specific tastes, and obviously that will impact on the wine as well. So yeah, for my understanding, I look at the complete picture of what goes into making that wine taste the way it does.
I had a question about yeast, Lydia. So yeast is used in winemaking. That's the driver of fermentation, isn't it?
Yeah, so, absolutely. Yeah.
So
Saccharomyces cerevisiae.
There we go. Bless you. And does that do winemakers use different strains of yeast? Do they use wild yeast? How does that have an impact on flavour in wine?
Yeah, so there's lots of different strains of Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which is the yeast that ferments. But before that one becomes dominant as well, there's a succession. So there'll be other yeast species that will then die out as the alcohol increases, or as the Saccharomyces strain becomes dominant. So it's like a successive process, and then you've naturally got yeast, like what we say, wild yeast, ambient yeast in the atmosphere in the winery that can spread and grow and populate and perform the fermentation, or you can just add a specific strain of Saccharomyces if you want, perhaps it to work at cooler temperatures for a cool ferment, or if you want one that releases certain particular flavors and aromas. So there's lots of different particular strains as well within that you can choose.
That's because the driver of fermentation in cheese is bacteria, not yeast. So yeah, it's a particular type of bacteria that feed on the sugars, the milk sugars, which is lactose, and then they produce acidity essentially. They consume the sugar and kick out acidity, which helps set the milk and makes it safe, because if you've got quite an acidic environment, it stops bad bacteria growing. But then they also play a really important part. There's enzymes in the bacteria that, when you're maturing cheese, break down the cheese in certain ways, and different bacteria will break down the cheese in different ways and give you different flavors and different volatiles. So and the yeast and mold bit with cheese is more in the maturing room. So you find that more on the rind of cheeses, or actually within the cheese, like in a blue cheese, that's Penicillium roqueforti, which is a particular type of mold. And they can be quite unique to a particular place. But we'll come to that. I think it's probably easier as we eat and drink to touch on this.
As we go through. But yeah, definitely, obviously, particular vineyards can have specific strains of yeast. That there's been some, I think, in New Zealand where they haven't found that strain anywhere else in the world, so they would say they want to use that ambient yeast as part of their terroir. But bacteria is still important in wine as well, though not the negative stuff.
No.
But yeah, let's move to the first cheese, and we can incorporate all these elements as we go through, hopefully, or some of them.
Yeah.
So
Okay. So
before it runs off the board.
first so first cheese. This is really interesting. So this is Banon. Now all the cheeses tonight have been that Lydia and I are tasting are from a brilliant cheesemonger in London called La Fromagerie, set up by Patricia Michelson, and they're, as the name would suggest, they've got a lot of strong heritage in sourcing continental cheeses, particularly French, but they also do lots of really good British cheese as well. And so Banon, as you can see, it's from, I'm just going to move, sorry, I can't see my own slide here. Yeah, so it's made in the sort of Haut-Provence region, which is sort of bottom right-hand corner of France. Quite, it's not, you're not fully into the Alps at this point, but it's quite hilly, so you're quite high up. And you can see from that picture the terroir, if we're talking about the actual landscape, it's quite hilly, it's quite sparse, and gets very, very hot in the summer, as you'd imagine. So, you know, well over 30 degrees. You know, cows would struggle in this landscape, but goats are quite tough animals. And there is a particular breed, a Provençal goat, which is quite, and you can see that there, which is quite a hardy animal, can sort of chew on anything really. So it works quite well with this kind of scrubby landscape. And you can see, I mean, I've got my, I don't know if you can see my cheese, it's wrapped up in a leaf, or several leaves actually, which is so it's a goat's milk cheese wrapped up in chestnut leaves, and it's very ancient cheese. They've been making this cheese in this part of Provence for hundreds and hundreds of years, and originally the leaves would have been used almost like packaging to protect the cheese. You know, before refrigeration, wrap it in chestnut leaves, and it would protect the cheese in this quite sort of harsh climate. They also, I mean, they keep that as a sort of nod to tradition now. But what it does is, when the cheese is enclosed, all wrapped up, you get sort of unique molds, and it sort of creates a little microclimate for the cheese, almost like its own leaf-wrapped cave for the cheese. And so you get unique kind of molds, a mix of molds and yeasts growing on the outside of the cheese, which break it down. And you can see it, or you can see it on that one, and in the picture there, you get this real mix of different things going on. Some of that's yeast, some of it's mold, and there will be bacteria as well, no doubt. What's interesting about this cheese, if you go to northern France, where it's a lot cooler, what they do is they're called lactic cheeses. So if you go to the Loire Valley, things like Crottin de Chavignol and Saint-Maur de Touraine, what they do is they leave the milk out for about 24 hours to slowly acidify. And so those bacteria that I talked about will slowly kind of convert the sugar into acidity, and that will naturally start to curdle the milk. If you left milk out in this part of France for 24 hours in the height of summer, it would go off, and you need bad bacteria would get in. So what they do with this goat cheese is they add rennet. They make this cheese really quickly, actually. So they get the milk, they have some bacteria, and then they add rennet to set it really quickly. And then they can wrap it up and store it. And so the texture is quite different. It's quite smooth and paste-like, whilst some of the Loire cheeses will be quite crumbly because they're high acid. So this cheese has been developed uniquely to suit the area that it's made in. You know, it's been wrapped in local leaves. It's using rennet to create a sort of quick set cheese because it's so hot. So is that terroir, Lydia? That's my question. Does that count as terroir? Would that count in wine as terroir?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's lots of different interpretations. What I would want to ask is, because that's what I'm going to focus on with some of the wines, perhaps, is, you know, why is this different to, say, other goat's cheese? What flavors would you pick out that for you that are specific? Because for me, I've tasted some, and it's definitely a lot stronger.
Yeah.
I'm not the best at describing the cheese. So for you, what is it that makes this cheese sort of Banon?
It's punchy. It's quite a strong. Yeah. It's quite a goaty goat's cheese. A lot of the Loire, those sort of classic French Loire cheeses are certainly when they're younger, are much milder and creamier, and sort of cleaner in a way. There's so much mold activity going on the rind of this, which is coming from that, using the chestnut leaves. The leaves will also often be soaked in a local eau de vie to sort of sterilize them. And I think with this one, I was speaking to the cheesemonger at La Fromagerie, and they were saying they use a kind of plum eau de vie to sort of sterilize the leaves. But I think that will add flavor to it. But it's because it's quite a thin cheese, so that you get a lot of mold and yeast development, and then they mature the cheese from the outside in. And so they break down the cheese, and mine's going really runny now and it's kind of dripping everywhere, which is delicious and great. But as the molds and the yeast work on the paste, you get, it breaks down and releases flavor volatiles. So it's quite, I mean, you can sort of, it's quite punchy, it's quite pungent, isn't it?
Definitely. All right, well, let me just have a little talk about the wine, because obviously that was down near Provence. We could have chosen a Provence rosé and stuck with the sort of what grows near each other goes together, but I thought as we're just off the back of English Wine Week, we would go for an English rosé, so that all the wines weren't French, can't have everything coming from France. And this is Chapel Down, so you've got the picture there. English rosé, they're the biggest English winemaker, and they have vineyards all throughout the southeast, so Kent, Essex and Sussex. And what I really wanted to demonstrate with this wine was climate, and that's why I went for England, because obviously we've got a really cool climate, sort of just on the border, able to grow grapes. And for me, that has the biggest impact, biggest sort of defining influence on the style of wines from England, because as grapes ripen, sugar increases and the acid decreases, and in a cool climate that's going to happen to a lesser degree. So you have wines with very noticeable acidity. I love them, really sort of clean, very sort of noticeable acid backbone, and really fresh fruit flavours. Whereas perhaps, a rosé from a hotter climate might have, if you think of like a Californian Zinfandel, for example, white Zinfandel would be really kind of like baked strawberries, or strawberry sweets, quite perfected. Not like that at all. This is actually very much like fresh English strawberries that are in season at the moment, sort of citrus notes as well. So for me here, the climate definitely impacts. You've got this lovely acidity, quite low alcohol use, add a little bit of sugar is about with the boundaries. This 12%, I believe. So yeah, so obviously we are getting sort of warmer here. It's going up. I'll tell you the great variety. It's mainly Pinot Noir, 57% Pinot Noir. 16% Rondo, which is a great region, Pinot Meunier, Chardonnay, and then Dormel. It's a real mix, but the majority being Pinot Noir, which is that lovely kind of red fruit. And then a little bit of winemaking is they do a whole bunch press. So normally with rosés you might have some skin contact, some maceration to get the colour, but here they just go straight for a whole bunch press, so you get a really delicate pressing, and the only time the juice is in contact with the skins is while you are pressing, so maybe 3-4 hours in the press, so you just get lots of acidity and lots of fresh fruit flavours. Apologies if there's a bit of sound issue. It's peak time on the internet.
I can hear you much better now, but you've there you go. You're starting to move again now.
Okay. Oh, sorry. It's just sometimes the internet. But yeah, it's a really fresh, clean rosé. And for me, it's all about the climate. This lovely acidity, delicate alcohol, really kind of fresh, leaner body, and they do the winemaking to accentuate that, this delicate pressing, no oak, cool fermentation, so you just have those lovely kind of fresh strawberry, raspberry esters. So that's what I wanted to highlight here. That actually isn't a picture of Chapel Down. That's such I haven't been, unfortunately, but I have been to Denbies, which is also in Sussex. So that's a picture of an English vineyard, and you can see it's so green. We have rain here, lots of rainfall, cooler temperatures, and the wines for me reflect that. There's this lovely kind of bright acidity through them, but also because we have a cool climate, you get a nice slow ripening, and you've got long daylight hours in this cool climate, so you get this sort of build up of fruit concentration as well. Have you got the same rosé, Patrick?
Yeah, I've got exactly the same rosé. And so in, you know, what you would drink in the south of France, if you were in Provence with a Banon Goats cheese, you would drink rosé. But you know, a southern France, a Provençal rosé would be bigger fruit, would it, Lydia? You'd have less of that freshness.
Yeah, exactly. So talking about, you know, why, if you were blind tasting, obviously I think rosé is an interesting, I wanted to talk about with terroir, because a lot of people go, oh, well, rosé tastes the same, but actually they have very subtle differences, and climate is something that really displays itself in the nature of the fruit, the alcohol, the body, the acid. And in Provence, you'd still get some acidity, but it would be less than England. You get more alcohol, normally about 13%.
Yeah.
It's can be based on Cinsault and Grenache. You get like kind of riper fruit. So, you know, I think there are subtle differences. Yes, someone corrected me that Denbigh's is in Surrey. I always get confused between my counties are not good. Surrey, Suffolk, Sussex.
I mean, it's an interesting
one.
But
it's south. It's outside London, but within the southeast. I mean, it was just to show an English vineyard. Please don't you know, kill me for that.
But it's quite light. You know, it's quite a sort of, you're definitely right on that sort of English strawberries, sort of light red fruit, nice acidity, freshness. And the cheese is actually quite powerful. I mean, you asking about specific flavors, it's quite hard when people are asking and you're tasting, and I'm getting a lot of vegetal notes from the cheese. It's quite sort of you can almost taste the tannins in the leaf as well. I think there's a sort of tannic, almost a slight bitterness at the end. And I could see why, you know, if you're drinking a more robust rosé with it, that would work. They would kind of, you know, they would meet each other and kind of take each other on. But I actually quite like this. It's quite light. So it's sort of, it's that acidity kind of washes it away, but then the cheese comes back again at the end. So you do taste the wine, and it's sort of, you get all that little burst of lovely red fruit flavors, and then the cheese kind of sits back for a bit, and then it sort of, you get a second wave of the cheese. Quite an interesting match, that.
Yeah, I thought at first when I saw the goats that it would be a bit too sort of overpowering for the rosé, but actually, as you said, having tasted the rosé first and then the cheese and rosé, sort of brings out some of that kind of raspberry berry fruit.
Yeah. It tastes sweeter. It tastes sweeter with the cheese, I think. The wine tastes slightly sweeter when you have it with the cheese.
It has got a couple of grams, got like 3 grams, but you normally wouldn't notice it. But with the cheese, it does come out a little bit, and the acid is just lovely because it's so cleansing. But yeah, I think this would work well with other, you know, perhaps less pungent goat's cheese as well. Would be a really.
Lydia, I brought a left field drink to the party just because, you know, I had it in the fridge, and I'm doing a tasting later. Next week, so I've got a white port from Newport, brilliant producer in Portugal, and so this is a dry. It's called dry white. It's their white rabbit, and that because that's got a lot more kind of oomph about it. And I tried that earlier with the cheese, and it worked really well as a nice.
With the Banon.
It still had that acidity, but then because it's a fortified wine, it sort of had some oomph to it as well, which kind of stood up to the Banon.
Brilliant. Right, shall we move to the next cheese and wine pairing? So
there's a suggestion saying that maybe you should switch to audio only.
Yeah, I saw that. Don't worry, we're recording, so carry on, Patrick.
Okay. So next cheese is an English cheese. It's way before Cheddar was king in the UK. In England, Cheshire was king, and so in the sort of 16th and particularly 17th century, Cheshire became the cheese of choice in the UK, particularly in London. And there was a huge demand for Cheshire. They used to make these whopping big cheeses and send them down to posh London cheesemongers like Paxton and Whitfield on barges and on sail ships that would actually, you can see where Cheshire is made on the map there, so in the northwest, and it was the cheese of choice. And then slowly sort of Cheddar in the sort of 18th and 19th century sort of overtook it and became the world famous cheese that it is now. And Cheshire really lost its way, and today there's only a few producers left who make it in a very traditional style. You can buy lots of industrial Cheshire, which is pretty rubbish if you ask me. It's very sort of acidic and crumbly. But the one that we've got today on our board is a beautiful orange colour, which comes from the addition of a vegetable dye called a natto, which you find in a lot of things like red Leicester as well. It's a very traditional thing to do. It's completely harmless and tasteless, but it makes the cheese look gorgeous. And they would have done that hundreds of years ago as a kind of marketing tool for a cheese to stand out on a cheese counter. You make it orange, and it sort of looks good. And I picked Cheshire in terms of terroir because the region it's made is the Cheshire Plain, which you can see at the bottom there. It's very flat, this part of Cheshire. It sort of stretches from the sort of Mersey Valley in the north down to the Shropshire Hills in the south, and it's bordered either side by sort of the Pennines in the east, and in the west you've got sort of the Welsh mountains. But you've got this beautiful sort of flat farmland. Underneath that basin is lots of salt. And actually salt, this region of Cheshire, there are still salt mines in Cheshire. So Saxa table salt, which you might know of, most of it comes from this part of Cheshire. And Cheshire, when you're talking about sort of farmhouse Cheshire made with raw milk, where the cows are eating this grass, has a minerally, almost salty quality to it, which comes directly from, this is proper terroir in my view. This is the soil through the grass, through the cow, into the milk, and into the final cheese. And this is made by it is the best Cheshire maker in the world, basically, which is Appleby's. And although they make Appleby's Cheshire, they're actually based in Shropshire, which is a bit confusing. But as I said at the beginning, the Cheshire Plain goes into sort of North Shropshire. And so historically would have been made there. It's a crumbly cheese. It's about 3 or 4 months old. This one, cow's milk, raw cow's milk. And you can see they make it in a very traditional way. They bind it in cloth. And those sort of green screw-like machines that you can see are presses. And so that, most presses when you visit a cheesemaker are hydraulic presses, but they're still using the old-fashioned historic screw presses that would have been used hundreds of years ago. So this is a cheese that's really rooted in its region and its terroir, I would say.
Thank you. It's delicious.
You like it?
Yeah, I really like the texture of it.
Yeah, it's flaky. I mean, there's lots of these regional British cheeses like Wensleydale and Lancashire. A lot of the Dales cheeses, there's cheeses like Coverdale and Swaledale, and they're all quite young cheeses, 3 or 4 months old. They tend to be quite moist, and they have this beautiful acidity and flakiness. And when they're done well, they're brilliant, but they've been done so badly by industrial producers that people think they're all the same, and they're not. If you can find a good small producer of these cheeses, they're brilliant.
All right, so with this, talking of minerality, and it's a rather sort of complex word in wine and probably in food. It means lots of different things for people, but ultimately I wanted to show Chablis because for me this is a Chardonnay that definitely I think epitomizes terroir. Which one have you got? You got slightly different. I've got Domaine Roquefort, which is the one in the picture, Vieille Vigne. And for me, yeah, Chablis sort of, obviously lots of wine epitomise terroir, but I used to love it in a blind tasting because it's such a sort of different expression of Chardonnay could always pick out. And that's a combination of things, but I definitely wanted to talk about the soil here and that sort of linkage with what Patrick was saying with the Appleby's. To show you where it is, so in northern France, this is a cool climate of Chardonnay, and I'm out because it is that much further north than the rest of Burgundy, so that again gives wines lots of acid and sort of more sort of citrusy green fruit flavour characteristics. But the real thing here is the soil, and it's not quite as straightforward in wine that you go, okay, this is grown on a chalky soil, so you literally taste chalk in the wine. There's a lot more kind of science behind it, and there's still actually a lot of things that aren't understood. They don't understand the connection, because we pick on that when we want to, when you want to say, oh, this wine has a sort of flintiness. Like I do believe Chablis, you do taste something a bit sort of flinty or stony. But then you don't say that with other soil types. You don't say, oh, this wine tastes sandy. So like, it's not like a direct kind of, oh, the flavors go straight up, into the grapes. But there's definitely, obviously, the soil definitely impacts on the vine in lots of ways that we do understand, and also some ways that we don't understand. But things like temperature, the availability of nutrients, microorganisms, water, there's so many things that ultimately then impact on the grape and the flavor profile. And in Chablis, there's two types of soil. There's Portlandian clay and Kimmeridgian clay. And Portlandian is more limestone based, and it tends to actually be on the lesser side, so more in the Petit Chablis appellations. And this is why terroir is so linked to wine, because that's the way these systems have been defined. The appellations are made on where your vineyard is, what soil, what grape you grow, how you make it. That's the basis of it. So the Kimmeridgian soil is soil that years and years ago was actually at the bottom of the sea. It's got limestone, but it's also got clay and marl, which is clay and limestone, and you actually get these fossils, like fossilized oyster shells and things in the soil, which is what I'm grinning there, looking very pleased with myself, holding up. And obviously, I'm not going to say you can literally taste like the wine, but there is this unique mineral, stony, steely flintiness to Chablis, and it tastes in such a specific way that I love. And that Kimmeridgian soil is in the village level Chablis, which this is, and the Premier Cru and the Grand Cru site. So they clearly recognise that this soil makes better quality wines, and you do taste that element in the wine in these better quality wines. This is Domaine Vauquois, is a really family generation, fourth generation run, really good producer, and they specifically make this wine the village level with no oak, stainless steel, so that you literally really taste that sort of unadulterated cool climate Chardonnay. And we opened it yesterday. I had a cheeky taste last night beforehand, and it's tasting even better today. Lovely kind of citrusy notes, that stony steeliness. They'll do malolactic fermentation. So you were talking about bacteria, Patrick, and this is the softening of the acidity in wine. So they use lactic acid bacteria to soften the malic acid, the really harsh acid, into lactic acids. You do get some little supplementary secondary notes of kind of yogurt that I tend to get in Chablis, natural yogurt, rather than kind of butter.
Lydia, this is the match of the
it really works, doesn't it?
It's absolutely knockout, and all of the things you're talking about, that's yogurty flavour, because I think Cheshire has that. It has a tang to it, but it's that sort of yogurty tang, like those dairy notes. But it also has a beautiful sort of savoury quality, I think. Appleby's Cheshire, it's one of my all-time favourite cheeses, but because it's quite subtle but has great length and complexity, which is it doesn't give everything to you straight up. You have to kind of work at it a bit, but there's lots going on, but it's not big brass band flavours, it's more sort of subtle flute.
Yeah, understated elegance,
to be honest. But the minerality and the yogurty stuff that you get in the cheese, and it's definitely in the wine, and they're just like taking you up to sort of another level. It's really picking up on each other and bouncing off each other. Really good match, that.
Someone's asked, is Kent Kimmeridgian terroir too? I'm not sure if it stretches to Kent. There definitely is, though, actually the same terroir. It's more like Champagne, that the soil there, the very chalky soil, and it's actually the same geology based in the kind of goes under the channel, and does pop up in Kimmeridge and in the UK. I think it's more, as you know, my English geography stuff, I think it's more in the south, like more Dorset way. But they in Kent, at Chapel Down, they do have some chalky soils, but also some clay and some loam as well. Just to answer that
Just
question.
the thing with Chardonnay, you know, there's a lot of people who say, "Oh, I don't like Chardonnay, can't stand Chardonnay," and that drives me mad because Chardonnay can be anything. There's so many different expressions of Chardonnay, aren't there? I mean,
Yeah,
it can
definitely.
be so different. And so this is, you know, I mean, I think a lot of people think of Chardonnay as the sort of the big new world, heavily oaked wines, but this is so, like you say, steely and elegant and completely different, isn't it? Amazing. It's the same
Yeah.
grape, really.
Exactly, and that's why I think Chardonnay especially always expresses terroir and the winemaking, the climate, everything about where it comes from. Should we move on to the next one? So we've got
Yeah.
time to comment on
No, I could
it.
stay with that Cheshire for quite a long
I
time, to
know.
be honest.
Come back to it. That's what I'll be doing.
It's a great sort of it's a great all-rounder, the Cheshire. You can have it for lunch, great at breakfast, brilliant on a cheese board, makes the best cheese on toast. Seriously, amazing stuff.
Okay.
Right, so what are we on now? I have to get my drink sorted out. We're going red now, aren't we?
Yeah, Isle of Mull Cheddar. So you're going up to Scotland, and I've got some Pinot Noir. So I can talk about the Pinot Noir first if you want. If you're getting your
No, yeah, go on. Speak about. Let's skip on to the wine. Go on, talk about
while
the.
you're pouring. So this I wanted to go to New Zealand as I've been there, and this is Central Otago. So again, obviously you can get some great Pinot Noirs in Burgundy, California, and New Zealand, but they are the sort of three countries that really I think do Pinot Noir well. And Central Otago does have its own specific terroir. It's the only sort of semi-continental place in New Zealand. You can see it there at the bottom of the map. So unlike the other coastal areas that are more moderated, you do get these extremes. So the climate here, you've got this big impact of sort of hotter days, and then lovely acidity, kind of cools down at night. So you've got this diurnal range, which slows down the ripening of the grapes, preserves the freshness, but you also get this warmth in the middle of the day. So you get a bit more alcohol, a bit more body and ripeness than perhaps Martinborough or Marlborough Pinot Noirs. But what I actually wanted to focus on here, because we've obviously talked about climate, was the viticultural practices as well, because there's a real focus in New Zealand, particularly on the environment. There's lots of organic and biodynamic wineries. The picture on the left is actually when I visited Quartz Reef, which are a biodynamic winery in Central Otago years ago. But this is Roaring Meg Mount Difficulties wine. But they're based in the same region, and they follow sustainable practice. There's a big association called the New Zealand Sustainable Wine Growing Initiative. So it's a combination of really like looking after the vineyard and not just the vineyard, but you know the whole sort of natural resources of the country as a whole, and wine growing within that. Because ultimately, thinking, you know, if you damage your vineyard, your terroir, are you then going to be able to make the same style of wine? So it's about preservation, and they you know build that into the whole overarching concept, from having a low energy winery to water waste management, to using organic practices, but not everything, but not using sort of aggressive herbicides or pesticides or anything like that. And I'm not saying necessarily that, you know, non-conventional winemaking can't make wines that taste of terroir. They absolutely can, but I think there's a lot to be said for, obviously, if you value it, you want to preserve it, don't you, and look after it. And there's a real focus on the environment, you know, in New Zealand, and taking care of that. So they say their aim is to remain organic while also reducing their carbon footprint. And so all the viticultural practice sort of go into that, and trying to actually trade off some organic practices, but others where they don't account for carbon emissions, doing something else that will limit that. So really kind of taking care of the environment. And someone asked where we got the wines from. I got the Chablis and the Pinot Noir from Majestic Wines, where I used to work. The Chapel Down is actually available in Sainsbury's, Waitrose and Majestic. And I did have to buy them, thank you very much. Someone said join MW, didn't have to buy them. And the Chateau Vignon was through my father, but he imports this wine. I'll come on to that. But yeah, I love this bit. Really, for me, tastes of Pinot Noir. It's got that, you know, in Central Otago, you get that ripeness of the kind of black plum and cherry. You get a bit more body and alcohol than some other Pinot Noirs. And that is because of the climate there. It's also very dry. That really helps them be more organic, because you haven't got so much issues with rot, and they get very cold winters, and again that kills off a lot of pests and diseases, which can means you don't have to use as much herbicides and pesticides and things, which is good. Anyway, Patrick, do you want to have you got a mouthful of cheddar?
Yeah, so actually I don't have a Pinot Noir with mine. I'm drinking a rather random Italian Merlot, which is very good actually. It works quite well. So the cheese I've got is it's basically a cheddar, really. It's made in the cheddar style in the Isle of Mull, which is in the Inner Hebrides on the west coast of Scotland. On the island of Mull, it's made near Tobermory. And if anyone's watched the CBBC, What's the Story, Tobermory, they'll know where I'm talking about. It's a beautiful little fishing village with sort of different coloured houses. And they have a whiskey distillery there. And you can see, so the landscape of this part of Scotland is very different to, say, Somerset, where cheddar originates from. So, you know, the climate is much harsher. You know, the cows, it's a tough life for a cow in Mull compared to lovely sunny Somerset, where you've got lush green pastures. It's quite rugged territory. And that means the cows aren't out for as long. So, you know, they're out at pasture. You can see it there in the far left-hand corner. You can see it's quite a sort of tough landscape. There'll be a lot of rain, but also quite cold and windy. So the cows only go out from about March to the end of August. And then they have to come back in to the sheds, partly because they just don't like it. It's just unpleasant for them. And you know, they don't fare very well in really cold, wet climates. When they're in the when they're back in the sheds, and actually during the summer, when to sort of fortify their grass diet, they feed them the spent grains from whiskey production. So you make your whiskey, and then they actually, what's left over from the whiskey production is then fed to the cows. You can see that's Chris Reed feeding the cows with it's called draff, and it really comes through in the, you know, you do get a slightly sort of fermented, cereally kind of flavour in the cheese. Isle of Mull cheddar is a big cheddar. It's gutsy and it's like bracing. I always think about like walking along the beach in Mull. What it would be like is a bit like eating the cheese. You know, it's sort of it's up front and quite powerful. And that's coming directly from where it's made. You know, I mean, they can't have your classic black and white Holstein cow is not tough enough to survive up there. So they've interbred Holstein with other breeds from Scandinavia and from Switzerland, which are used to being up in mountains or in more sort of difficult terroir. And so they've, you know, they've sort of created their own breed to do well in this part of Scotland. And I think it comes through. It's full of, I get an almost boozy flavour from the cheese. And there's almost there's a slightly weird fishy note. I don't know if you're picking that up, Lydia, but like on the nose.
Thing that I tasted and I thought, wow, that's really different to some of the other cheddars we've used on these talks. It's really strong.
I'm being corrected on CBBC here. It's What's the Story, Balamory, not Tobermory. But I think, isn't it filmed in Tobermory? I'm pretty sure it is. Anyway, CBBC.
You can say what you like.
No, we've got a new expression. Tobermory's a womble, Jane Cassell says, which is true, isn't it? Yeah. Anyway, this will mean nothing to people who haven't watched TV in England and in UK. And
yeah, it doesn't mean much to me.
No, well, you're too young to remember the wombles, Lydia. But it's a big cheese, and I'm interested to see what you think, because I think Pinot Noir can be quite it can be quite a delicate grey, you know, but maybe with New World Pinot Noir you get more of those sort of smoky, meaty notes, which would work perhaps better with a big cheddar like this. But I haven't got the wine, so tell us, what do you think of
Yeah,
the
and
match?
that's why I went for Central Otago, because although New Zealand is called climate, the fact that, as I said, it's got this continental gives, and these extremes, you really get ripeness, because you've got in grapes, you've got the flavour ripeness and you've got the phenolic ripeness, which is the skins. So you get this sort of more blacker fruited profile than, say, in Burgundy, more ripeness. They can be 14%
Oh, really?
alcohol. This one's 14%, they can be more. So you get this ripeness, and that body, it gives richness to the one. So it is a richer style of Pinot Noir. This is still a healthy cheddar. It would definitely work, I think, with even bigger reds. But I do like it. There's some real, dark fruits on the nose. And this is Mount Difficulty's second wine, so which is made to be a bit kind of earlier drinking, but they do a more even their Mount Difficulty range is more premium Pinot Noir, which have more oak. So you could try it with that or other Central Otago Pinot Noirs, because not everyone wants the really big tannic reds. And that's some of the questions have said. People, often want a wine for the whole cheese board, and Pinot Noir, because it is a lighter red but does have some depth, could kind of work, I think, with a little bit of the kind of softer cheeses and the stronger.
Yeah, if I have a sort of if I've got a cheese board and I want, and it's a really wide ranging cheese board, I find a sort of French Pinot Noirs work really well. So Burgundy is a really good match for so many ranges of cheeses. But also some of the Loire reds work quite well as well, because they have that acidity, which works a bit like a white wine or a rosé with softer cheeses. But then, like you say, has enough fruit to kind of match up with harder, your sort of Gruyères and Comtes and Parmesans and that sort of stuff. Blue cheese and red wine, I find that a very difficult match. And well, we're going to come on to a blue cheese and we're going sweet, aren't we? But yeah, and also with washed rind. Actually, some of the sort of smokier Pinot Noirs work quite well with washed rind cheeses, the quite funky, farmyardy, smelly cheeses. So I think Pinot Noir generally is quite flexible when it comes to wine, as long as it's got that acidity. It needs a bit of acidity.
Yeah, and this does, I was saying, because you've got sort of mountains in Central Otago, but you've also got this diurnal range, so it really cools down at night. That stops the grapes ripening, so it really preserves the acidity. So that's what I love. Yes, perhaps compared to some Californian where it's really, it can be really warm, and you still have the freshness, but here, you retain that freshness, but you've got the ripeness in the body as well. Let's move on to the final one then. I'm sad. It's sad we're almost there. And enjoying myself so much. So tell us about Roquefort, Patrick.
Can you? The next one. So So Roquefort is a place, which it's probably one of the along with Brie de Meaux is probably one of the most famous French cheeses. So it's a PDO cheese. It's protected, as was Banon actually. So Banon is a protected cheese, can only be made in that area. So Roquefort has a PDO, and it means it can only be made in this part of southern France, which is Aveyron. And it must be made with sheep's milk, and it must be made with raw sheep's milk from a particular breed called the Lacoune breed, which, as you can sort of see from the picture in the right hand corner, this is quite a hot part of France. I mean, it's not a million miles away from where Banon's made. It's quite rocky, it's quite sparse. Sheep and goats do well in that kind of landscape. Cows like lush fields, basically. And you don't get many of them in this part of southern France. And the reason I picked it is because it's so linked to the place of Roquefort. Under the terms of its PDO, all Roquefort cheese, whether you've bought it in Tesco's or from La Fromagerie, absolutely world-class Roquefort, it's all matured for some period of time in the caves of Roquefort. And so if you see, so top right hand corner, basically there was a mountain called the Comte Mountain, and at some point, many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years ago, the top of the mountain kind of slipped and fell down to create, you can see those cliffs in the right hand corner. So what you have in this, the village of Roquefort is at the bottom. You can see the little village of Roquefort at the bottom of the cliffs. And at the top is a great sort of plateau, the Comte plateau. And within those limestone, that kind of, those cliffs are lots of caves. And so if you look at the diagram that's there, all Roquefort cheese will be matured. There's only sort of 7 families or 7 companies that have caves in this part of Roquefort, and all their cheeses will spend at least a bit of time being matured in the caves. And the reason for that is well, there's several reasons. It's historical. That's kind of where cheeses were matured, because before refrigeration, the cave is a perfect place. You've got a very cool standard temperature. But what's particularly good about the caves of Roquefort is you have these kind of, you can see from the top of the mountain, you have all these cracks and crevices, which then allow airflow to go through the cliffside and through the caves. Those cracks and crevices are called fleurines, and they create a lovely, just gentle airflow, which is what you want in a cheese cave. You don't want lots of air flowing through. You just want a gentle airflow, which takes away some of the ammonia that will come off the cheese and just create a nice atmosphere. And the other reason why historically cheeses were aged in these caves and still are, is there's a particular mold that grows very well in these caves, which is Penicillium roqueforti, which is the blue mold in all blue cheeses, but particularly the blue pockets of blue mold that you find in the cheese are really encouraged in this cave. And you can see the young Roquefort in the bottom right hand corner maturing in the cave. And for a long time, people have thought that the actual mold grew naturally in the rock. And so if you leave the cheese in there, the spores of the mold, the fungus, get into the cheese, and then it starts to activate in the middle of the cheese. One of the ways historically they would encourage this mold is they'd put loaves of rye bread into the cave and let them go moldy, and would actually take the, you know, if you leave bread out long enough, you get blue mold on it. And what they would do is scrape the blue mold off and actually sprinkle it into the cheese, and as they were making it. And there's been quite a lot of scientific research into it, and what they think is that actually the spores of the mold are not in the rock. They're actually either in the wheat, in the rye, in the actual cereal to make the bread, or it's actually in the feed for the sheep. So they give the animals a particular feed which has this spore in it. So there's quite a lot of science into where is this blue mold coming from. Is it actually the cave, or is it from what the animals are eating, or is it from the bread that they grew the mold on? And I think it's the last two that they're coming round to. But I mean, it's so rooted, Roquefort, in that place, that, I mean, if that's not terroir, I don't know what is really. So I'm going to eat some now. Well, what do you think?
Before you fill your mouth, there was a good question that said, if the society controls production, what contributes to the differences in quality?
Well, as I said, so if you look at the bottom, that is a graphic from a producer or an affineur. What they'll do is they'll work with, say, about 20 farms, and then make the cheese and then mature it. So Société is one of the producers. Will have its own dairy and its own cave, but there are actually 7 Roquefort houses, if you like. Société is one of them. The cheese we've got from La Fromagerie is the smallest producer. Société is quite big, and the one we've got is from a producer called Carles, or Carles, which is run by, it's a family-owned cave. So there's 7 in total. There's another really good one called Papillon, like butterfly, which is a good one to look out for. Société is one of the bigger ones. I think Société might be owned by Lactalis, who are one of the big dairy multinationals. So there's certain Roquefort houses to look out for. and Papillon's a good one, and Carl's or Carles that we're tasting now is another good one. They tend to work with a fewer number of farms. It's smaller production. And actually, the cheese that we're eating, Lydia, they still use the rye bread method. A lot of the Roquefort producers will use molds that are grown in a lab and just add them to the milk. But Carl is still put big lumps of rye bread in the cave and let it go blue, and then scrape the mold off and sprinkle it into the curd when they're making the cheese, which is super traditional.
Okay, well, from one mold to another, and actually, that's actually funny you said butterfly, because the producer of this wine that has a few properties, they're called Famille Double, and you can see it's actually a dragonfly. That's the image on the label there. But yeah, one of the key things of terroir here for sweet wines is obviously the mold for Botrytis noble rot. But actually, what I chose to have here is not a really sweet wine. So this is actually a Bordeaux Doux, which is a kind of semi-sweet wine. It actually has under 45 grams per litre. So it's not as full on as Sauterne or Barsac or some of those sort of more famous sweet wine appellations. But I think in the summer, and it's really good. It's a little bit lighter. So what they actually do for this wine is they pick a big mix of the grapes, and you can see there in that picture that I took when I was in Lupiac, the botrytis, the mold doesn't affect the grape uniformly, doesn't affect the bunch uniformly. So some of the grapes are just sort of about ripe, and you start to see the little specks on them where the mold is attacking. Some have started to shrivel, some are really raisined and botrytized affected. So what they actually do for this is you've got Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon blend, and they pick some of the grapes that are ripe, some of that are kind of overripe, raisined, and some that are botrytized. So you get a benefit of everything. You still got some sort of freshness from the normal fruit, but from the botrytized grapes, you're going to get increase in sugar, aromas, the botrytized kind of marmalade effect. And you'll get some residual sugar because obviously there's an increased concentration from the raisined and botrytized grapes, but it doesn't, some of it will ferment out, but you've still got a degree of sweetness, but it's not as kind of intense or overpowering. And I think in the summer, or not everyone always wants a really sweet wine, and this works really well, I think, with cheese, but also with strawberries, if you're just having like a summer pudding, or even some fish, like think about lobster, something with a bit of sweetness. It's got a lovely sort of lemon peel, orange note to it, but it's not overly cloying because there's just a sort of hint of sweetness. With a little bit of that kind of like honey waxy notes from the botrytis, and yeah, really nicely cold. You were saying you like your Roquefort cold, just to bring out that freshness. It's not, yeah, it's just something I thought was not as heavy as some of those other sweet wines, but yeah, I think the epitome of terroir, you have to have the conditions, particular conditions for this rot to occur. So it's all about the humidity. So a lot of these famous sweet wine regions are where you've got a lake or different kind of streams and tributaries that have different temperatures that form some mist and fog, and that causes the onset of the rot. And then you need a nice sunny afternoon, like you can see in the picture, to speed up the evaporation. This is just the Bordeaux appellation, so it's Bordeaux Doux, but this vineyard, Chateau Vignon, is actually situated in the Entre-deux-Mers, so just to kind of go across a little bit, sort of in the middle of the Entre-deux-Mers region, across from Barsac and Sauterne. And there's other sweet wines made around there, and they get these conditions. So yeah, really, you don't get these sort of wines made everywhere. So definitely, something to do with the climatic conditions that you get for this rot to permeate, and then the impact it has on the wine. It's Semillon and Sauvignon Blanc.
So Lydia, someone was asking about other wines to go with Roquefort, and mentioned Baume de Venise, and that's actually what I'm drinking tonight.
Yeah.
And it's just, I mean, that cheese is off the scale good. I mean, the
cheese is delicious.
It's unbelievably good, that Roquefort. I mean, yeah. It's got like chocolate notes. You're getting that sort of like almost like milk chocolate or white chocolate notes. Because often, I mean, Roquefort is by its nature very salty. That there's a high salt percentage, and can be really spicy. But this, I can definitely taste the sort of the animal in this a bit. You can taste the sheep. There's a kind of sheepiness to it, which is almost like sort of lammy quality to it, but then a sort of sweetness and salt. But it's working really well with this wine, which this one has loads of sort of marmalade notes and honeyed marmalade, all of that sort of stuff. And that sweet and salt thing together is just, you know, blue cheese and sweet stuff works really well. So a piece of chocolate with blue cheese is really nice. But even a stout, and I'm gonna mention beer now, but stout or porter, a milk stout is really good because they add lactose to the stout to make it even sweeter, and that just sort of wraps around the saltiness. But that, just delicious. And actually the Baume de Venise would be a bit of a lighter sweet wine, would it? Compared?
No, I would say stronger. So Baume de Venise is fortified, so they add alcohol, so it's always at least often about 16-17%.
Yeah, this is 15%.
15, yeah, they can be a bit more. And sweeter. So yeah, if it was a Sauterne would maybe be sweeter, but I've got a kind of semi-sweet Bordeaux, which you've got that, which will have at least a sort of 100 grams, and then you've got that high alcohol. But I mean, I think both work. When you've got like you say, a blue cheese, something, you really need a wine with some flavor intensity. So even if you don't like sweet wine, you need something that's really concentrated, and obviously the production methods here just lend itself to that. And then in Muscat you've got a really aromatic grape, and then high alcohol you've got something really honeyed and grapey and strongly flavored to match.
It's I mean, Sauternes and Roquefort is the classic match, but they're quite far apart in France as regions, because I mean, I wonder what they have, you know, in the south of France where they make Roquefort. I think they tend to drink red wine with it, but I find red wine and Roquefort are really, that's the classic tannins clashing with creamy cheese thing going on. I've struggled to match red wines with Roquefort, and sweet stuff works really, really well.
Definitely, and that's why I like this one, because it's sweet, but it's not, you know, really, really sweet. So you've got enough sugar to pair the salt and the sweet and the fruit and the tanginess of the blue, but it's not too intense. But yeah, I mean, we've always said what we're doing is just experimenting, and everyone has different tastes. And we've always said, you know, experiment, try what you like. You could try the sweet with the different ones, you could try the rosé with the whole board. It's really just up to you. You might like red wines and big blue cheese. So experiment.
Everything is personal, and half the fun of cheese and wine is just trying stuff, and if you like it, that's brilliant. I you know, certainly not trying to dictate to people. It's you know, whatever works for you is brilliant, really. If you want to drink you know, lager with Roquefort, then go for it, I say.
Patrick, we're still doing about wine.
Oh yeah, sorry.
But yeah, I mean, I think we've kind of just scraped the surface on terroir, haven't we? But even just with those choices, you could see the parallels in climate, the specifics of the climate with the Provence goats and the English rosé. You had the minerality of the sort of soil impact and the Chablis and the Cheshire, which I definitely think was pairing of the night, by the way.
Yeah, I'd go with that. Yeah, I think Chablis and Appleby's Cheshire is. I'm actually, when this finishes, I'm going to go and explore that match in great depth my kitchen.
I particularly liked your expression about the hardiness of the cows up in Scotland, and I kind of see that down in central Otago as well. It was quite rugged, and you've got these extremes like cold winter, warm summer.
You need rugged grapes for that.
Yeah, exactly. And then the kind of classic, but the parallels with the mold and the aging, or the Botrytis grapes, and yeah, as I say, we've probably just scratched the surface. There's so much you could talk about terroir, but hopefully
what I like about this idea of terroir is that actually, you know, a lot of these products have been made in a particular region for hundreds of years, and over that time, you know, producers have tailored, you know, whether it's the grapes or the cows or the style of cheese, whether they use rennet or they let the milk acidify naturally. They've done it because they're being influenced by where they live, by the weather, by the soil, by the you know, I mean, that is the definition of terroir, isn't it? It's kind of it's the place where it's made, and it works in that place, I suppose.
Definitely, yeah. That's what I think. A sense of place. Like, does that wine tell you something about where it's coming from? And ultimately, some more than others. You know, some wines can only be a specific wine, and others could be, you know, there's other areas that can produce similar styles. But yeah, delicious everything. So thank you. As always, we've overran. Apologies, but me and Patrick just love wine and cheese so much. But thank you. Thank you all for joining. Thank you. A shout out to La Fromagerie, as Patrick said, for supplying us with the cheeses. They were all delicious. So thank
Lydia,
you.
can I just have a quick plug, by the way?
Yeah, absolutely. Your details are up there. So yeah, go for it.
I was just going to say, so I am now teaching the Academy of Cheese Level 1 course online. I have my first course next month in July. It's 3 sessions. They're 3 2-hour sessions on a Monday night, basically. And I've got that sold out really quickly, which was great. So I keep it small, just 8, 9 people, and we do it over Zoom, a bit like this, really, but for a couple of hours on each session. And at the end of it, you're ready to take your level 1 exam. But I've got other courses in August and September and October now. So if you go on my website or the Academy of Cheese website and have a look, we can go. And actually, I'm going to do quite a lot on drinks pairing with cheese, because and not just wine, Lydia, I'm sorry to say, but I'm going to do beer. I'm going to look at cider, certainly fortifieds. Sake is something I've done quite a lot with cheese and sake pairings, which work really well. So yeah, that's something that's going to be quite key to what I teach online. So check me out.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you, Patrick. And yeah, make sure on Instagram it's Patrick McGuigan 1. Otherwise, you'll harass a rather different Patrick McGuigan.
Yeah.
And yeah, equally, all our school, if you're interested in wine, spirits, sake courses, check out the website. We're doing, obviously, we do classroom courses, but we do everything online. And at the moment, our level 1s and 2s, you can complete online now with a remote invigilation exam. So you don't even have to leave the comfort of your home. So thank you again for joining, everyone. Thank you, as ever, Patrick, for your cheese guru time. And
Pleasure.
yeah, thank you, everybody, for joining us.